Hello and welcome to the Tech with Heart show. I am your host, Michelle Calloway. Tech with Heart, it's all about enlightening and empowering small business owners so that they can stay competitive and relevant in today's digital era, whether it be through technology, whether it be through systems or strategies. And today's topic is profitability. We want you to be successful, and that means you need to have profitability. So with me, I invited a very special guest. Her name is Candy Messer, and she is a profitability and growth advisor. She works with entrepreneurs in the service-based industry, and she helps them experience success in their business. And she has been in the bookkeeping industry since 1998, and she is the president of Affordable Bookkeeping and Payroll Services. She's also the co-author of Business Success with Ease, Navigating Entrepreneurship, and also the host of her own show, her own podcast called Biz Help for You, which you can find on YouTube or any podcast platform. So without further ado, I'd like to have you help me welcome Candy Messer to the Tech with Heart show.
Thank you for the invitation.
We are happy you are here, Candy, and we do look forward to hearing what you have to say about increasing profitability. I know a lot of small business owners are wearing so many hats, and I'm pretty sure that's one of the biggest struggles, right? So let's dive right in. Common business mistakes is the title of this episode when it comes to limiting profitability, and we don't want to do that anymore. So let's start with, what is a common mistake you see business owners making when it comes to being compliant? Let's start with compliance.
Yeah, compliance is not a fun word for many people. And the thing about it is if you don't do what you're supposed to, then these agencies come and they penalize you. They're going to give you usually at least a 10% penalty and interest for any amounts that you haven't paid, or like not filing. There's filing fees that they could charge. So the first big mistake is really not filing your documents on time, whatever that might be. If it's a business license, if it is payroll taxes, sales tax, all of those types of things, because then now you have these fees on top of any amounts that you should have paid. And another thing that is overlooked often that people don't always understand is the 1099. And you're supposed to issue this to someone if you pay in the course of business at least $600 or more. There's, some exceptions to that rule, but as long as you paid by cash or check, a debit out of your bank account, you're supposed to report that. And it got even more confusing because now there's a couple forms. It's not just like the one. People are familiar with the 1099 MISC. Now they have an NEC. So I think sometimes people get confused and think, well, it's not that big of a deal. I just, won't worry about filing them. But purposely failing to file could result in an almost $600 per form fee. So it's a pretty serious deal if you do not follow what the IRS guidelines are.
So, wow. Okay. So those are that's good to know, right? So what is it that they can do, small business owners, to mitigate that from happening?
Well, I would say the first thing you should do is if you use project management, put a reminder in there for every year or every quarter, however often you have to pay these certain things, to remind you. If you don't use project management, most people have a calendar on their phone or, on their email through Outlook. Put something in there as a reminder and put it a week or more ahead of time, right? Because often we get so busy last minute and we think we're going to get to things and we don't, right? And so remind yourself ahead of time, give yourself that time where you can gather the information, make sure all your bookkeeping is complete. If it's something that requires, using the figures from the prior year, if you're submitting information and your bookkeeping is not complete, it's not going to be accurate, right? So making sure you have a reminder. If you're unsure of how to calculate that, you can always reach out to that agency or, someone like us who helps people with those filings and calculations, because it's getting more and more complicated, even if you're talking like sales tax That has just like really gone crazy because now states could make you pay tax in their state, even if you're an out-of-state company. That's a whole topic on its own. But a lot of people just don't understand all the rules regarding these types of things. And so what you don't know could end up hurting you. And the government doesn't care if you didn't know. If you're saying, oh, I didn't know it had to be this, well, you should have according to their guidelines. So I think finding out in your industry, maybe what are typical things, asking someone else that is in your area, maybe even like, well, what are the things that you have to file to see if you might be similar? If you're somebody who's newer in business or you really don't know, let's just get some guidance.
I also just, just suggest you Google YouTube videos. There's also just Google itself if you want to learn for yourself, like what are the
Mhm.
things that you need to be compliant for. But it's really nice to have somebody in your corner that does understand the CPA world, bookkeeping world, accounting world.
Right.
So let's move now over into accounting. So what is some of the biggest mistakes you see small business owners making when it comes to just accounting per se?
Mhm. Well, a lot of times you're not even sure how to do everything properly, right? Like, I mean, even if you went to school and you took business classes, maybe you had an accounting class, but a lot of people in their field didn't even have to take accounting, right? So you're operating a business and you're not even sure how to actually properly post things. So I have seen people, post like income from, they say it's income, but maybe it's a loan, right? And that's not income, or posting payments as an expense when it is reducing your liability. Like, so if you don't know what should be an asset, what should be an expense, those types of things can cause errors in your bookkeeping, which can also affect your profit and what you have to pay in taxes. So getting a little bit of training on that is recommended too, if you're going to do it on your own, or of course you can have someone help you. Another thing is not reconciling. A lot of people who have used, let's say, QuickBooks Online, or maybe they're using Wave, or some of those softwares that are out there, they could connect their bank account and it fetches that information from the bank. A lot of people think that when that comes in, it's accurate, but a lot of times it's not. And so they'll first of all post it potentially to wrong accounts, but they assume that also means it's reconciled. Reconciling actually means matching what your bank statement says to your accounting file. And you do that by actually marking off what appears on your statement. And then hopefully your discrepancy is zero. If not, you find the errors. If you're just letting the bank import and assuming it's correct, you could be missing transactions because sometimes the bank feed has a glitch. Sometimes it imports it more than once, right? So you really need to do the reconciling as well and make sure that's how you prove your books are accurate in terms of what cleared the bank. Still might have some errors in terms of postings to accounts, but at least this is what came in, this is what went out. We have a $0 discrepancy. And again, double check the entries to make sure they're posting correctly, because the system will think like, okay, you went to Amazon and that is going to be, let's say, professional resources that you purchased, but maybe it was office supplies. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's your Prime membership that's dues and subscriptions. So you really have to review them to make sure that they're accurate.
Those are all such really great tips. So basically, categorizing your incomes and expenses properly will indeed affect your profitability. That's what I'm
Mhm.
hearing. So it's super important to make sure that you are at least getting your expenses and things categorized. You can work with your bookkeeper to make sure that they understand it, because remember, they're not in your business like you are.
Mhm.
And also the reconciling part, making sure that you're double checking and not just trusting tech. You always want to
Mhm.
be in the know. You should know, as you're the owner of your own business, you should take the time to understand your numbers and make
Mhm.
sure, because when you sign off on tax returns, you're signing off your name. You're liable regardless of whether your accountant made the mistake or not. So those are things to keep in mind. And it's really, like I said, it's really great to have somebody like this in your corner. Candy's definitely been doing this for a while now. So that's why we had her on here. She knows what she's talking about. Let's now move into what is the biggest mistake you see small business owners make that do indeed impact their profitability beyond what you've already shared. Do you have any other thoughts on the profitability margin? Or what is a profit margin? Maybe you can explain what a profit margin is compared to like a gross versus net and all that. I don't know. Maybe you can talk about that.
Sure. Well, one of the things that really affects profitability too, even before we start talking about like what are the margins or what's net profit versus gross profit, really, one of the things I see sometimes is business owners who are so dedicated to helping their customers get their work done that they put themselves on the back burner and they don't invoice their own clients consistently. Now, some people will have where, they have to pay up front, and that's great. Like if you can get paid up front, fabulous. But that could also lead to some issues because if it's, say someone is paying for 6 months, you don't get to claim that income in the first month. You have to spread that out. And that's a whole nother thing too, that we could go into another time, because that will take some explaining how to do that. But that's one of the things, is really not tracking the money that you're receiving properly, but not invoicing your customers. If you perform a service and then you invoice them later, then you need to do that consistently. And if you don't, and if you're waiting until finally like, oh, I'm about to run out of money, I better invoice, then the customer also thinks, oh, but it's not that important to them. They did that work for me, 2 months ago, and I'm just now getting an invoice. It must not be that important. I could pay in a few more weeks. Right? And so when you're the most desperate is when it's coming in even slower. So I always say, whether it's as soon as you finish the project, or if you have a certain date in the month, or maybe every Friday, make sure you put yourself on your own calendar and make sure you're invoicing your customers and make it easy for them, to send you the money, whether it's, an automatic, they click a link and they give a credit card, or if you auto charge their bank account, whatever that is, make it easy, but make sure you send them that information consistently. And you keep that cash flow coming too. That's really important. Another thing people do is they may see a software they want to try, and it might say you have a 14-day trial or a 3-month trial, but you have to give your credit card often. Well, then they forget they signed up for the trial. It switches to an automatic payment, and they might forget that that is actually being charged. They might not even be using the software. So it's important to audit what your expenses are periodically. Make sure that you don't have some of those recurring charges that you forgot about. Or maybe you still remember you have it, but you're not using it. And you're, okay, well, I'm not really watching that, TV cable station anymore or something. Maybe I need to get rid of Hulu or, whatever that is. But really pay attention to what those expenses are. And then you can improve your profitability by eliminating things you don't need to pay for any longer. And of course, we talked about if you don't file on time, you get these penalties and interest. So that could have a huge impact. If you're a small business and you're being charged a 10% penalty on something, if you owed a few $1,000s, even a few $100 is a big deal to have to pay in penalties and interest. So making sure you stay on top of all of that and avoid those errors. And finally, one of those things that goes along with those amounts that you sometimes are charged for that you don't realize is making your estimated tax payments. So you are supposed to make those 4 times a year, generally January, April, June, and September. If you don't pay in your tax throughout the year and you owe more than $1,000 in tax, the IRS or your state, depending on what their amounts are, if you have state tax, they will also penalize you. So those are all really important things to keep in mind that can affect your profitability. And just to touch on, go ahead.
Being able to do business online is crucial for survival, especially during times of social distancing. So how do you survive and thrive in the sea of digital noise? It's a lot like fishing. You need to know who your perfect customer is so that you can use the right kind of lure to attract them. We help you catch your perfect customer and retain them for future sales through highly converting websites, influencer mobile apps, getting you featured in the news and on TV. Hi, my name is Jerry Bowden, U.S. Army veteran and president of Revelio Software Solutions. Our goal is to help you rise above the competition, be seen as an expert authority in your industry, and embrace technology to stay competitive for long-term success. It's more affordable than you may think. So reach out to us at revelio.com, and together we will make your business come alive.
Curious, when you mentioned the quarterly, the tax, Are you talking federal? Are you talking sales tax? What kind of a tax are you talking about?
So in that case, I was talking about estimated tax payments, which is basically you're paying your income tax that is due for your business, whether it's to the IRS or personally. If you are like an S corporation and it flows through to you personally, then you make those on your personal. But there are estimated tax payments you have to make generally to the states that have income tax. You're supposed to pay them quarterly. And again, quarterly is not exactly because they don't have it every 3 months. As I mentioned, there's between April and June, you only have 2 months. Then you go June to September 3, and then September to January is 4. It's kind of strange how they do it. But you theoretically have to pay. And just like if you were an employee and you had a W-2 and they were taking taxes out as you earn the money, you're supposed to be paying into the IRS or to your state during the year what you owe based on your earnings.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. It's something that not everybody's aware of. There's different types of requirements too, based upon how you are structured as a business. You mentioned S Corp, where money flows and still kind of goes into your personal. LLCs, it all goes into your personal. And then the C Corp is where everything is completely separate. But you need to understand that too. I mean, when you went into business, you should have had an advisor to help you set up things correctly so that you are not going to get in trouble. Like she was explaining, that you could get dinged pretty hard because you're expected to know. If you step into wearing a business hat, you should study what world you're stepping into.
Right.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about those profit margins. Can we talk about what is a good, healthy profit margin? I know, it comes up all the time in our conversations with small business owners, pricing, right? So they want to know how they can price themselves competitively, but also obviously make a profit. So let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point to bring up too, because a lot of times people aren't sure, like, what should I charge? And if you're service-based, it probably isn't as important per se. I mean, it's still important, but if you're selling a product, you really need to know all of your costs, right? If you have, the utilities that go into running the machines, that, go into manufacturing the products, and what was your raw material cost? And a lot of times people will just say, well, I buy things for this and I'm just going to double the price. Well, that might not cover all of your expenses for your labor and your overhead, your insurance, all of those. So I would say you really need to look at what your true costs are for everything, and then figure out what it is that you need to charge for. As a service-based business, then you also we're going to need to look at, well, what do I want to make in the year and what are my costs? And so if I'm going to work this many hours, right, I need to make this much money, that will help you figure out what your pricing, needs to be at a minimum. But you really need to look at everything. And that's one of the mistakes people make too, is really just looking at those obvious costs, but not remembering all the other things they have to be putting into, again, if you have insurance, if you have employees, you have your workers' compensation and your payroll taxes. It's not just the salary, it's all of the other things that go along with it too. So that's one of the key things to really look at, and determining what that pricing really is. And sometimes people think what they're selling is actually a moneymaker, but if you really look at everything that goes into it, you might actually be losing money. So it's important to really analyze that.
And there are templates that you can find out there to help you figure out the costs of goods sold, like help us do a spreadsheet so that you can factor in all of those things and then determine what your profit margin can be above and beyond those things, so that you are pricing yourself right. And then you do an analysis, you can identify whether or not that is a competitive wage or sorry, not a wage, but a competitive cost compared to your competitors. You do your competitive analysis. And if you find that they're able to offer a whole lot more for a whole lot less, then you can reevaluate your situation and figure out what is it that you could do to kind of come closer to matching them. But at least you understand your numbers, because it's kind of a lot of work to run a business, and you put your whole everything into it, right? You just live it, you breathe it. It's all you it's all you become. It's like, it's just, this sometimes can feel like it can take over. So it's so important for you to be informed so that you're making informed decisions, because sometimes what you think you should do is perhaps not what you should do after you do some analysis and you identify, whoa, I'm not going to make a dime. So I'm basically just working just for the sake of working. So
Right.
yeah, it's good stuff.
One thing I think would be good to touch on too is really understanding that profit and cash flow are not the same. And so people sometimes will say, well, how could I be profitable if there's no money in the bank? And there are certain things that you can't deduct. So like, again, if you have to pay taxes, you might write a check, for your taxes, but the IRS isn't going to allow you to write that off as an expense. So if you had to pay $3,000, you actually are paying tax on the amount that you paid to the IRS because your profit is 3,000 more than what you had in the bank. It's also like where we talked about loans, you might have cash in the bank because you got a loan, but that's not income, right? And so you can't really match them up exactly. You really have to understand the two different things, although they're related, they're not the same. So you're not going to see like, I have a certain amount of money in the bank and that's the same amount of profit that I have.
Good point. So let's go back and just really quickly address you mentioned cash flow, and I kind of remember it led me think to people say, I've made this much revenue this year. There's gross revenue and then there's net revenue. And then within that net, you can determine what your profit margin is. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, revenue is really what you're selling your products or your services for. So that's like your top line number. If you're looking at a profit and loss report, that number is at the very top. What did you sell? Here's how much you brought in. If you have returns or you have, discounts or things like that too, that usually is right under that number. And then you end up with what's called gross profit. So it's just sales less any of those discounts. And that's before any of your expenses in terms of overhead and things like that. Now, if you have cost of goods sold, right, that's going to be at the top as well. So then you're looking at, okay, well, what is our profit? And then you take off your expenses and then you end up with your net profit. So if you want to make like a certain amount of money, if you're saying, well, I want to make 30%, then you need to make sure that that profit, if you have $100,000 in revenue, you end up with $30,000, at the end, so that you've made 30% of that total revenue, right? So you have to really look at those. I actually have a guide. If anyone is interested, I could probably send you a link. It is vocabulary that's used in accounting, and it explains, what the different margins are and what's the difference between cash flow and profit, and really giving some of those terms, because again, a lot of people didn't even ever have any schooling on this. And even if you did, you may not remember what all the things are. And it's really important to understand your financial reports and be able to use that information to make wise business decisions. That's the reason, not just for tax purposes, like so that you could give your CPA the information, but using the information to be able to improve your profitability, improve cash flow. What do you need to do to make changes in your business? So you want to be looking at that information and really understanding it. And it's okay to say, I don't know what this means, because I'm not an expert in the medical field either, right? I'm going to have to ask questions. So it's okay to ask questions. And some people sometimes feel embarrassed about that, but there's no judgment. Right? So be like an advocate for your business by being able to say, I'm not sure what this means. Can you explain it to me?
Good point, because we can't go around thinking, we've got it all figured out. It's so important. And I would love that in the blog that we can do later. We'll put that link to her resource vocabulary guide, because it's super important to be able to speak that language. So if you are working with an expert in that accounting arena, that you're speaking the same language is super important. And this has all been very enlightening, I believe. It's not a sexy topic, but it's super important to understand topic. And I believe that the better informed business owners are about certain things like this can be a strategy, an accounting strategy. You want to be profitable. So this comes into that category where we're here to enlighten and empower you to make better, wise, and more informed decisions to help your business be successful. So, Candy, where can people reach out to you if they are interested in finding out if your organization would be a good fit for them for their small business needs?
Sure. My website is abandp.com. It's short for Affordable Bookkeeping and Payroll. So you can reach out to us and find some information on our company. I do post episodes from our show, you mentioned that I have a podcast too, Biz Help for You. So we do post that there too, as well as some video and written blogs to help, because my goal is really educate business owners to help them be successful. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Candy Messer.
Perfect. And I really appreciate that, that you also have resources that people can watch or read without necessarily having to even have a conversation, because not everybody's up for that right away, that conversation. So this is good news. Then let's go ahead and ask, what is a thought or a phrase that you believe you could leave impressed upon those that are tuning in regarding this topic?
Say, make sure that you are paying yourself in the business too. Don't wait and pay all your expenses and see if there's any money left over. Make sure that you are allocating money for yourself, because you want this to be something that is paying for your lifestyle, right? And being able to earn money from your business.
Wise words. All right. Well, thank you so much, Candy. And if you're tuning in right now and you are a small business owner who just really wants to grow alongside others because you don't know everything and you need to bounce thoughts and ideas off of each other, come check us out at techwithheartnetwork.com. We are a community of small business owners, very innovative, but yet heart-centered business owners who really love to grow alongside one another. We are a nonprofit. Tech with Heart is a nonprofit organization that exists to breathe life into small business owners. And we also have a minority student internship program that we're going with right now too, to provide that value for students entering into the workforce or wanting to enter into entrepreneurism. So you can learn more about that by going to our foundation's website, which is techwithheartfoundation.org. But if you're a thought leader like Candy and you would like to come onto the Tech with Heart show and share very valuable insights that are really working in today's digital business landscape, we would love to hear from you. You can go and check us out again at techwithheartnetwork.com, and you can apply to be a speaker on our show. We would love to hear from you, and let's figure out how we can get you to share your wisdom while you empower others, and who knows, potentially even attract some clients come your way. So I want to say, if you're a small business owner, congratulations, you've accepted the hardest job that there is in the world, but you can be successful, and it can be amazing when you are. So here's to your success.
Your story needs to be seen and heard, and your brand needs to be revealed. Revealio elevates purpose-driven businesses into the spotlight through video storytelling, augmented reality video marketing, and professional website design. Get discovered online or in the news. Be featured in national magazines or host your own TV, podcast, or live radio show. Together, we make your brand come alive. All it takes is Revealio. Visit Revealio.com to get started today. Minority and service disabled veteran owned.